We are live. Hey, Sean, how's it going, man?
Not too bad, Chris. How you doing, brother?
Good, man. Congrats on 3,000. You got there.
I mean, it's this guy right here. I was told it's all about looks on YouTube, so thank God, because that's the only thing I'm bringing to the table.
I
Yeah,
think
I
it's
mean,
a little bit
I
more than
appreciate
that.
it. I can't believe it. I had no thought. I remember trying to get to 100. Took forever, and then just in the blink of an eye, kind of exploded. So appreciate that. Thank you.
No, no, dude, you're our Nestor. I don't know if you know anything with the Odyssey, but you're definitely our Nestor. I wouldn't want to be a Agamemnon. I think Amit would probably be a great Agamemnon for the amount of all the stuff that he does. So I'm probably Ajax. I don't know if you know anything about the Greek mythologies, but
Of course, yes.
Nestor is a compliment, by the way. He's like a very wise person. Yeah.
No, no, I'm with you 100%. Yeah, I'm just more
Yeah.
thinking.
Yep.
I'm thinking of like Brad Pitt's version of this, and where we're aligning with different people jumping off the boats.
Yep, yep. So, welcome everyone. Today we are going to be talking about a company that is actually pretty under the weather. Under the radar, even though everyone knows about it. It's kind of shocking. So, I was looking at Uber, and I was taking an Uber the other day, and I was like, man, like why don't I ever invest in Uber? So I did some deep dive, some research into it, and I was just like, how is this possible that they're only a $70 billion company with $100 billion run rate right now? It's nuts. So let's talk about Uber. What do you think? Have you, Sean? Or do you use Uber?
Yeah, so it's funny, right? When you were talking about Uber earlier today, excuse me. I was thinking like, I just took an Uber last week. I was coming out of a hotel in Dallas, had to get to the airport. It was like 5 in the morning. And it's been a couple years since I've really needed an Uber like that early in the morning or something like that because I haven't been traveling as much. Now I'm back to full-time traveling. So the app is on fire on my phone. And I was thinking like, even as I'm hitting the button, I'm entering like, yes, confirm, this is where I am. Even as I'm doing it, and I've done it 1,000 times, I still couldn't help but think, my God, this is so easy. There's no like, where are you? I can't find you. Are you on the way? Is this cab going to show up? And for those who maybe aren't the same age, like trying to get a cab, oh my God, what a pain in the rear end. Like just the process of knowing exactly where I am and how easy it is. It's all online. It's all on my phone. I didn't love wearing the mask in the back seat, but I'm still. It is what it is. So that was my only downside. But yeah, it's like it's just such an easy, life-changing product that's changed the whole planet. And you're right. Like no one talks about it. They're not a cab company, right? I mean, they're an everything company. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
which one?
there's so many verticals that they're touching these days. I was at work, and I was like, well, I needed to get some groceries real quick. And if you're in the city, one of the worst things, especially if you don't have a car in the city, is getting groceries because you got to take them, you got to lug them all the way around. And I know there's tons of companies out there right now. That everyone's like, yeah, but Amazon and Fresh Direct and everyone else, does grocery deliveries at home. But one of the things is that I am an Uber One member. Like I have a ton of perks that come with Uber already. So the thing is now I'm kind of locked into that Uber ecosystem, right? Where I don't have to pay any other membership fees to the other companies. And it was just great. Just literally as I came home, my Uber delivery had just come in too. So I just took my groceries upstairs. It was so seamless. So there was no friction whatsoever. So I began to ask a lot of my friends like what they thought of Uber, right? And they're like, dude, we use it all the time. Like there is not a day, especially if you live in a big city and you don't have a car, where you're not using at least a couple of $100 worth of Uber credit per day. Per month. Whether you're getting food from like the other thing is even at work right now. What I tend to, like what I have is I have like Uber One membership with my American Express Platinum, and it's great because I'll order for everyone in the office, and I'll get a lot of I'll collect those points, and then I'll usually just like do like one day where I'm the one that's like sponsoring lunch or whatever. But it's been amazing in terms of like the diversity of food that we've been able to be experienced with.
Sure.
Other than if Uber wasn't around, we never would have gotten to try. We would have literally been at the local halal cart like every day, you know.
It's kind of a funny point you're making because when you think about like when you step away from Uber as a car service and think about it from like a platform service, for a platform to really scale big time, the exact way you're describing it, two things have to happen. The company itself has to find value in what they're doing, of course, right, for shareholders, etc. But like from the consumption and the in the driver perspective, they need to find value. If you think about like the way Uber's approaching this, it sort of has been like pretty much flat brilliance, if we're really being honest, where like step one was acquire users. Then they're cross promoting their services, which is good for Uber, it's good for the drivers and deliverers, it's good for the consumers. And then, like you just layered right on top, is now you've got it's been acquired, you've been cross promoted. Now you're layering on like a loyalty program or a deeper membership purview. Like that's the value that I think investors don't see here when they're talking about Uber is really like for someone like me, like, yeah, I use it to take me from places here to there. For me too, also, I've been in some pretty bad cabs over the years, right? And just the idea of like it's a cleaner experience, it's an easier experience. And like, could you ever imagine a cab service delivering food? Never,
No.
right? Never. I mean, I can't even imagine the scenario. And I know we'll get to it too, but like some of the things we were talking about sort of just before we turn the live chat on around the different services they're doing. I had taken some notes prior to jumping on here. We'll get to them when it's the right time, but like the acquisitions, the growth rates, the times and how they've grown through the pandemic that we've been through, it's actually pretty wild. And like looking at the price today, actually, I'll just say this just for full transparency. For those who follow my channel, I do like a recurring 100K options challenge. I just updated it today. And I actually sneaked a peek that prior to you reaching out about this call today, I actually sold some puts on Uber. Had a nice little premium bump too as well. And the premiums are good. The price has been so steady. It just feels like it feels very mispriced. And just on that point, I know we're going to talk about a lot of things, but I wanted to share what I thought was sort of an interesting moment here from a pricing perspective, which was when I just want to quickly pull the some recent analyst targets, right? So the targets that I'm seeing right now have a low of $43 per share all the way up to a high of 80 with an average of about $60.50, give or take. Right? So keep in mind, a low analyst call of 43. The stock is trading right now at 36.5. So even our worst case scenario from the analyst perspective still represents, give or take, about a 17 or an 18% upside with a median upside of like 65 plus percent and a high upside of almost 120%. I mean, this isn't like, you know me, Kris, because we've done a bunch of shows together. Like, this isn't my version of trying to pump a stock. This is looking at a company, its fundamentals, its markets, the value it's deriving, the revenue it's showing, the financials that back it, the cross-platform services, the way they're adding growth and value to its users, its teams, and its consumers. But then even more, and I'm sure you're going to talk about this, they're starting to see wins from the legislative perspective as well, which is all the more reason to be perhaps bullish if it fits your portfolio and the way you go to market on it.
Yeah. And those are 1 year price targets. So just to let everyone know, whenever
Correct.
analysts do any price targets, it's a 1 year price target. So I think Uber is the other thing that I want to just highlight about Uber that I really liked when I was doing my deep dive was that they are using machine learning and AI to optimize so much of their processes. That's probably one of the biggest bullish cases that I see with them, and they're doing it so well. A lot of what they're doing is optimizing and just reducing the total cost of getting that service done. So while these other companies that are out there that are still trying to innovate how to do one or two things, these guys are just hitting so many verticals and utilizing their resources very well. So I think when I look at Palantir, and when I look at, I keep saying Palantir because I do so much research on Palantir. When I look at Uber, I see them as a great place to play as an AI play. The other thing is over time, I'm seeing a lot of people are starting to kind of give up a little bit on, especially in the urban cores, trying to give up a little bit on cars. There's so many issues around congestion and everything that people, it's uneconomical these days to own a car in the city, especially if public transportation is so readily available. So, like cities like New York, Boston, I know London have great transit systems that can, pretty much eliminate the need for cars to fully own it. The other thing is Uber actually now not only lets you book Uber rides, but did you know that they're actually doing car sharing where you can actually do car share like among, your neighbors and stuff if you want to and get paid for it. So that's like think of Airbnb with your car. I mean, there's probably going to be like some trust factors that have to be overcome,
Yeah.
but I mean, if you're letting strangers into your car, I'm sure that you're not opposed to strangers driving your car as long as, all the insurance stuff is all good to go. But it just goes to show that while I'm at work, what if I could rent out my car for a few hours so someone could do either, pick up their kid at work or, or go do like a run at IKEA or something, right? So it's like things like this that are huge that, just everyone is looking for additional sources of income. And I think Uber realizes that and saying, okay, you know what? Not only are we just going to have support like a gig economy, but we also have rental stuff. The other thing is I really, really like their CEO. He comes from a travel background from Expedia, and let me tell you, I think eventually we're going to see the melding of kind of like a logistical transport monster. That is
Yeah.
what Uber is going
Yep.
to become. One of the things I also like to do now is as I'm landing on my when I'm flying, I could pre-schedule an Uber saying, "Hey, I'm gonna need a ride," and literally as I get off LaGuardia, I go to like the pickup area. There's already a car waiting for me to go into the city. It's freaking amazing. I love it. Like the ease of use is probably like the biggest value proposition for me.
Well, and it's funny because what you're describing really is like an integrated travel and logistics platform, and like some new pieces of news have come out that their goal now in the next couple of years is to get every single practical yellow cab type of cab on the platform, right? So when you think about the full circle we've gone here from inception to 2022, now the cab companies have realized like, well, wait a minute, why are we fighting with these guys? This is a whole new stream of income. And if I can pre-schedule, instead of having to hail, like if anyone's ever come out of Penn Station in New York in the wintertime and there's a line of 70 people waiting to get a cab, I can assure you, you're standing there for a while. And the last thing you want to do is be waiting for that. If I can walk, 100 yards in the opposite direction and have a cab waiting for me over there, it's 100 times better for me and better for everybody else who doesn't have to wait in line as well, and spread that out a bit. Because that's another big piece of this as well, I think, from that perspective too, is there's a lot of just general FUD that will exist out there on any of these companies, especially because they have to break a lot of things to get to where they are today. But I think like this is what full circle looks like. The same people you were fighting are now embracing you. And this is what we see with we see this with Amazon. We see it with, Palantir, like you said, we see this with Microsoft in their beginning. We see it with Apple. Um, Uber is that level of company. It's just been confused with being just a car service for a little bit too long. People have really missed the forest for the trees. No, there's no analyst out there calling for a 100+ price target over the next 12 months because they think they're going to get 10% more people using Uber versus Lyft versus a taxi. It's that integrated cross-platform approach where once you acquire a customer, it just is so much easier. Chris, you said it a minute ago, and I'll ask you the question. If you know that you can get a ride, you can get food, you can get things delivered and picked up, it just feels so much easier to do it from one single source. That's what I would want to do. Is that your approach to it? Is that how you would use it?
Yeah, yeah. Speaking to a lot of neighbors, speaking to a lot of people, one of the biggest reservations that a lot of people have with investing in certain companies is that there's no feeling, right? Or you can't feel it. Like Palantir, you can't feel it. Salesforce, unless you work in the industry, you can't feel it. Uber is one of those things that you can go out and experience it right now. Go download the app, order what you want, look around and see what it is. And they have the other thing that I really like is that there's always promotions around. Like they have figured out a way to make me a loyal customer. There are maybe like 5 apps that I use regularly on my phone. Uber seems to be one of them
Yeah.
because I always see like specified deals that I run into, and they're starting to see, and they're almost adjusting their algorithm to things that I like and to certain like I feel it. Like you ever
Yeah.
you ever like when you're on Amazon, you feel like how come they're ordering things that are like specific to me that I wanted, but I didn't even know I want, but now that I see it in front of me, I can order. It's kind of the same way that's happening with my Uber app too, where I'm almost like I just open it up and it's like, oh, do you want to have lunch at blah blah blah? And I'm like, yeah, I do want Chinese today, So
It's funny too because I want to touch on two topics related to that. Is number one of the things they're really being hailed for is being an all-weather company, and I want you to give your opinion of what that means because you had mentioned freight. And the second piece of it is I think that as sort of the generation sort of between that's like call it like maybe teenager up to like 30 is really looking at costs and what things cost in their life. And they're trying to figure out like, hey, does it make sense to have a $600 a month car payment? Then I have to have insurance on top. Then I have to pay for gas.
Hmm.
Then I can worry about tires and oil changes and everything else. And like these are the kind of things I think that Uber as a platform is experimenting with is are there low cost sustainable solutions that will drive new things into the marketplace? Like, hey, if you really don't need a car on a regular basis, like you said, Kris, you live in the city,
Hmm.
right? Maybe you just don't need it at all, right? Maybe there's another option. We can get you on a plan that's predictable enough that both Uber can find a way to make profit with it, as well as to have that user feel like, hey, it's 300 a month, but they have access whenever they need it, versus the 600 to buy the car, then insurance on top and everything else.
Someone posted something very interesting, and I wanted to just say I totally agree with you. They are working on autonomous vehicles, right? So that I think in the cities it may not become a big thing right away, only because the way that the regulatory system is in the cities, plus the amount of like traffic and everything else that you have to deal with, AI might not be ready for that. But I can definitely see in small towns where there isn't a large Uber presence that people need cab rides. Like, so an example is my wedding. Like, I had a wedding in Dalton, Georgia, which is like a small town in like northern Georgia. We had a great time, everything, and I had a ton of guests come from like all over the place, and the closest airport was like Chattanooga. Now the thing is, I could have I could have had to like figure out a way to shuttle people between Chattanooga and Dalton, and that would have been really rough. But thanks to Uber, everyone just kind of came. They just signed up. Uber was there. Uber picked them up, dropped them off. But the one bottleneck that I ended up hitting was that there were maybe three Uber drivers in
Yeah,
all of Dalton, Georgia.
yeah,
So now all those people had literally either had to wait for so long, and maybe the Uber driver loved it. He was making money like there's no tomorrow, right? But I think in those regards, like especially like small towns and everything else, an autonomous car would be huge. Like imagine a car that could be plugged in, especially if it's an electric car, which they're moving towards, an electric car that can go plug itself in, get charged, right? And then drive to a person, pick them up, drop them off, and then go back into a holding pattern and get charged again. That
yeah.
kind of autonomy, especially when you're thinking about small rural towns, would be huge, you know.
So this is like a way off the topic kind of thing, but I want to say this is probably give or take 2016 timeframe. I was in Tempe, Arizona, for a customer meeting. Actually, of all things, we were talking about Jupyter notebooks. That's a real yeah.
Mhm.
That's if you're not into analytics, you have no idea what a Jupyter notebook is for. But we were doing some really deep level analytics work, and we happened to myself and the guy I was with, who we were together as a team. We went downstairs after the meeting. We were in Tempe. We went to a bar to have lunch, and we're sort of sitting by the open windows. And I kid you not, like this is when they were really testing the Volvo SUVs with that gigantic radar systems on the roofs. And we sat there literally for probably 2.5 hours, many drinks later, and we're like, holy moly! Like these cars are legitimately picking people up, dropping them off. We're watching this go on and on and on all day, and we had a very similar feel to what you described there, which was, look, that's an area where the roads are very flat. The infrastructure was built, fairly recently compared to where I am in the Massachusetts area, where like it's a nightmare around here. And it would be like trying to have an Uber navigate autonomously through Boston, where it's cobblestone streets and potholes, is going to be a pain in the butt. But in Tempe, Arizona, in Phoenix, Arizona, in Mesa, Arizona, like these are places where it was interesting to see it. Now, granted, of course, I don't think we're necessarily that close to it, but I will say, to your point, it becomes a question of like how do you have the ability to like centralize small regions of usage, right? Where you can move them where you need with one driver, make sure they're getting plugged in at night, make sure they're secure, whatever the case might be, right? And it's almost the feel of like a living garage. You got the one attendant up front who can have them come and go as they need throughout the night or whatever. And I agree, we're not quite there yet. But I mean, look at Domino's. Domino's is doing pizza deliveries through an autonomous vehicle already.
Yep, yep.
Like just local neighborhood type of stuff, but still interesting. I do think, though, I want to touch on the point from right before we kick the call on. One of the reasons analysts are very high on Uber right now is this all-weather perspective. That's the people delivery, right? The pickup service. That's food item delivery. That's sort of like your standard things, not people. And then there's the freight piece. Kris, you had talked about freight a minute ago. And just for anyone who's not familiar, the idea of an all-weather means the economy is good or bad, things are going to be okay. People are stopping to ride because of a pandemic. Well, freight still has to move. They can jump in and fill it there. So, Kris, I'd love to get your take on that because you brought up freight with me, and I'd love to hear more on kind of what your vision is for that and how they're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, logistics itself is a growing business. One of the things that we're seeing is there's a lot less of just people going to retail, and there's a huge demand for freight going from one part of the country to another, right? So that decentralization of storage and also moving things around is a huge growth driver. On top of that, you want to have a very frictionless way of doing things again. So you don't have to deal with subcontractors and all these other things. So right now, imagine right now you can become, buy a rig, get a truck, do all your licenses, permitting, and insurance, and
Hmm.
literally competitively bid for loads, right? So now you're literally doing the same thing in the gig economy, except you're doing it on the freight version. And it's the same thing with people doing last. And for me, I think last mile delivery, which has been the bane of existence because the total cost is so high, is probably going to be a godsend for Uber. The other thing is, as an Uber driver, the optionality is growing, so it keeps you tied into that platform as well. So you could do people pickup, you can do food delivery, you can do last mile delivery of items, right? They have a partnership with Apple where they actually do same day delivery, in which case an Uber driver will pick it up and drop it off right to you, same day delivery, right?
Hmm.
So it's verticals like this that are going to be huge for them going into the future. And it's literally, and if you think about it, most of their physical infrastructure costs are still only software. They don't own any of the physical infrastructure, but it's that platform that's going to be able to give them so much money. So even if they're only making pennies on the dollar when it comes to the transaction, the total transaction volume, the gross volume, is $100 billion, and that's not slowing down. It's actually accelerating as they go into these verticals. So I just wanted to bring up their presentation. Let me just share that on the screen real quick.
Which, by the way,
So,
I joined Investor Day, and I know
mhm.
every slide on here. And actually, funny enough, I'm planning to do a real deep dive on some of this. Like this, by the way, for anyone who's not familiar with looking at investor reports and presentations, this is really like a best in class. This is what I expect when I see an investor presentation from a company who's looking to have shareholders put their money with them for the long term. This is the level that you want to see.
This was 140 some odd slides. Just going through all of it is going to take us an entire day. So I'm just going to go over like some of the main highlights of it
Yeah.
real quick. So this is their executive board full of tons, I mean, their executive team, tons of great people who actually have been in this space for a long time. My biggest one that of course you always have to follow who the CEO is, has run successful companies before. This is not a turnaround story. There are areas where he's bringing a little bit more of a PR feel to Uber because they have had some PR challenges in the past, but I think they're going into the right direction with that. So let's just start off by right here. One of the things that they were really hard hit with was the COVID-19 pandemic. They're meaningfully recovering from that, and they're literally almost back to where they were before, in terms of just stock price. They actually are trading below their IPO price right now, which is kind of crazy if you think about it.
Wild.
So their total gross bookings were almost $26 billion in one quarter, 51% growth year over year. Their adjusted EBITDA is actually what do you call profitable. They have so many users on there. So if you look at their CAGR, and they've been literally consistently growing double digits,
Mhm.
they're on another ramp. These are all the acquisitions that they had. They actually divested in some of their other products that weren't nearly doing as well, and just focusing on their core areas. But these are amazing acquisitions. Some of them were competitors that they took off the market for really great prices, but some of them also brought new things online. So one of the things that I'm starting to see a lot of is alcohol delivery, right? So Drizzly was specifically for alcoholic beverage delivery for them. And like I said, they're accelerating on that front. So you can see they're not just in mobility, but they're also in delivery, freight. They're in over 10,000 cities and 72 countries. Talk about like the total addressable market that you
Wow.
have when you're in that many countries and that many cities. And if you look at here, like you said, an all-weather company, just constant nonstop growth. So a lot of people just think, oh yeah, they're only a mobility company. Their mobility is recovering, but that's on top of growing their delivery, and even their freight is only starting to just make some inroads. So
Yeah.
um
The,
so
the,
yeah, yeah.
the,
Sorry.
the, the pie is literally getting bigger, and their
Yeah.
pieces will grow with it, right? And that's the story here is we don't want to see this line in all blue, all green, all black, whatever. We want to see the line completely keep moving vertical and all those individual measures continuing to grow as well. And I think that's the story of what we're trying to see here over time is, which I think they're doing, frankly, is they survive. This is a car sharing company that just survived in a pretty good shape, by the way, as well, a pandemic where people stopped traveling for 2 years. And they're now still really growing at speed, basically.
Yeah,
And they have the platform advantage.
and one of the other things is, I know a lot of people are saying, well, they're not profitable. They never generate a profit. Well, yeah, it's the same thing as the story that Amazon had for a long time, that they were not generating nearly the profits. But the reason why they didn't flip that switch is because they were trying to acquire as many users as possible, get as much market penetration as possible. And during that time, you have to do promotions. You have to get deliveries. You have to literally do everything in your power to outcompete your competitors that are out there. Now they are almost the default company for mobility and for some of these other verticals that they're trying to penetrate. Now
Yep.
that they've got that market share, they can finally start to do a couple of things. Number one, use their power in market share to leverage for more profitable outcomes, right? And that's what they're doing. So I think that's another big. I'm not gonna go into everything, but
Mhm.
if you guys have some time, I really recommend you just go through their presentation that they did earlier this year. It will definitely just change your perspective on how many verticals they have for future growth.
It's wild, right? As you look at this deck, I think to myself, if you think that their competition is Lyft, you might not understand what Uber does. Because I think their competition is Amazon. Because I think
Hmm.
we are quickly moving towards a vertex where those two companies meet in the middle. Like one of the big things Uber's doing as well, and it's buried in the deep into that deck, is they're really focusing on multi-person rides. So think buses, right? That freight piece is that long distance. I mean, they've already got last mile. They're doing distant mile. They're doing people delivery at scale. And there's a safety factor too that a lot of folks don't think about. We oftentimes talk about this with. It's funny, not that it's a one-to-one comparison. A lot of people will say, "I don't see the value in Bitcoin. It has no utility." And of course, for those of us who are here in the U.S. and Canada, certainly in Western Europe, we look at it and think like, I've got 45 banks in my town. I live in a relatively small town. There's probably 80 banks in my town, right? And it's very easy to do your banking, very easy to move your money. So, sometimes you don't see the connection to be able to move money easily. If you're in an area where it's very hard to get a bus or it's impossible to get a taxi, this is a great play. I'll tell you a really quick story. So, I've been I've been in software for a long time, and part of that is extensive travel. Okay, and Kris, I know you travel a lot, by the way, also. But
Yeah.
sometimes I have to travel to places that are very offbeaten because sometimes we do government work, and that means data centers that are in the middle of nowhere. So I had touched down in Bangor, Maine, in the wintertime. Was able to get a cab from the airport to where I was going to meet up with clients for a dinner. We ended up getting out of dinner late. Everybody says goodbye. I walk out front, and I'm like, I got to go back inside and get a cab. I go inside and I call like 60 different numbers. And the guy at the place is like, "You're not getting a cab. You're going to have to walk." And I'm like, "That's a 40-mile walk, man. It's no walking," right? So, I think about this. This is pre 2011 when they could have even gotten an Uber. Not that they would have been a Bangor anyways. But now the thought of not being able to get a ride, it doesn't even exist to me. There's not even a question of like, can I get a ride? It's just a question of what type, how close are they, how long will it take to get to me, and then you're communicating with the person the whole way. If there's a conflict or an issue or there's a red light that's going to slow them down. I think about examples of that where I've personally been in a situation where it's been like a total panic of not knowing how I'm going to get where I'm going. I can't find a way there. Or in this particular instance, I finally found a cab and they were like, "We're only going to pick you up for cash and you're not going to get a receipt." And I'm like, "I don't have cash on me." And so I have to go in and now negotiate, like, a huge long story. Long story short, there are a lot of people who've been in my situation where, especially for work, right? You land somewhere you don't know. You can get a cab at the airport, sure, but then what? What do you do now? What do you do at night? What do you do when no one's working and no one wants to come and pick you up because they're going to make $14 to bring you to a hotel, but then have to drive another 50 back to the airport? And this reminds me of a lot of things. Is it starts with problems that aren't always obvious. Like
Hmm.
at first, it was about doing it in the city, but the reality is the big picture is what you nailed it with your Georgia story. It isn't about the big cities now. Now it's about expansion and really reaching out. And that visual you shared a moment ago of what was it, 10,000 cities, 72,000, whatever it
Yeah.
was, a huge amount of cities. I think about that. I'm like, wow, that is wild. And just, it's funny you shared the acquisitions. Someone actually just gave me a gift card recently at work for like
Hmm.
$100 at Grizzly, and had no clue Grizzly was connected to Uber, and then literally I just saw that it was on there. I couldn't believe it when I
Yeah.
looked at it.
Just trying to go back to the so look at the entire world. They're in literally 32 countries right now, or they have equity stakes in businesses that are
Yeah,
operating in other countries. I mean, you literally are coming, you're covering almost every human eventually, you know. Let
yeah,
me just see if I could just get that one thing. And look at this. This is
that's
their
wild.
delivery, by the
I
way.
mean, it's wild to think what that number is. That's wild.
Mm-hmm. Think about $54 billion in delivery. That's, I'm like I said, I'm shocked that it's still at the current price that it is. Like it drives me a little bit like, what am I not seeing? And every time I dug deeper and deeper, all I see is this is an undervalued company that just no one seems to be recognizing. And I don't know why retail is not recognized. For all the companies that retail is super bullish on, I'm surprised that this is not one of them, considering that retail probably uses Uber more than other segments of the population. So and look at their expansion rates that they're projecting for some of the other countries out there. Like they're projecting 60 times, not 60%, 60 times growth by 2024
Wild.
in South Korea,
Yep.
Germany, Spain. I mean, I'm telling you, this company is one of those that really is super undervalued.
Yep.
Let me just go back to
And while you're
that
looking
one.
at that,
Yeah.
just to the same point, like when we talk
Hmm.
about like a Square, we're talking
Yeah.
about like taking a tiny percentage of online things, right? It feels like, hey, sure, I use Square all the time. I can make sense of it. This is taking what everyone else has done online and putting it into the real world, which means real world implications, but it also means real world challenges. So the thing to keep in mind here, and for anyone who watches this later as well, Kris, you, me, and a handful of folks in the comments can certainly build a company that can compete with Square. I'm not saying we can put Square out of business, but we can start our own little company to take payments, take a 1% of the payment, and get all the local businesses in my area to sign up. Just to give a comparison, it wouldn't be impossible to start that up and get it going. For us to do what Uber did, the ability to enter the rideshare market is massive. You need to raise billions and billions of dollars. You probably still will not even be close to winning. So your best chance is to find a way to work with them, which only bolsters their platform anymore, even more. And I think about in my comment with Amazon earlier, I think about the fact that like Amazon has the fleet of trucks that they send out. But what a lot of people don't realize is there are a lot of people who own 10, 20, 30 trucks and they run those trucks as their own business, hire their own people. So although it's an Amazon truck, it may in fact not be Amazon's truck in theory, right? And I
Hmm.
look at this and I'm saying like, oh my gosh, why would I start? I don't want to start a livery company. I want to go and get 100 cars under an LLC and have them all out there pounding away into Uber doing deliveries. It's a full time logistics company where I have a platform integrated, and I think that's the big play here as well that no one talks about. Is this becomes really like a true SaaS offering, almost like a platform as a service for a lot of logistics companies down the road as well. So I know you're going to share something, but
Yeah.
you're actually getting me pumped up more than I was already just thinking about it. Now, that said, I don't know if someone should buy this stock or not, but I'm really talking about the company. The company just feels like this can't be right. These numbers can't be right. You know what I mean when you look at it? That's how I feel looking at it, as you said earlier.
One of the other things that I really want to just highlight that I think a lot of people haven't really thought about was their advertising. Okay. And let me explain that. Imagine right now your restaurant being at the top of Uber recommends. There is a price to that. Okay.
Oh yeah,
There is a price to being able to target people with a certain background that are using your product, right? And your ability to reach out to them. There are tons of businesses right now that are selling promotionally on Uber Eats that they're taking a loss on, but guess what? They're getting this clientele. So I'll give you an example. I have a Mediterranean restaurant in the Upper East Side that I love to go to. Would never have come across them had they been not running a promotional deal on Uber Eats. Now we order from there like at least once or twice a month,
yeah.
right? So imagine the total amount of money that one promotion ran that let you capture that additional business. So when you think about it, what is the true value of marketing and advertising that you're getting eyeballs on your restaurant, right? And the
Yeah.
total expansion of customers that you can gain. That is worth something. So guess what? Right now, Uber just lists your stuff, but guess what? Eventually in the future, just like Google, where you have optimized search algorithms kind of saying, hey, if you want to be on top, you're gonna have to pay us this extra money or give our members like promotional like abilities or whatever. Those things will help add to the pie for Uber. So not only are you charging people for the delivery, where you're getting a cut of the delivery of the total amount, but you're also going to get that advertising revenue that's coming in. They're projected next year to do about $1 billion in just advertising. Let me just show one other thing. So even so right here, you see this? So they can do sponsored listings, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So you can see that now they're starting to move into even an advertising verticals. And what's the one really amazing thing with advertising? Super high margin. Because all you're doing is just putting eyeballs on a product, right? Essentially, you're just optimizing your software to show people what they were originally going to already look for, but you're optimizing it a little bit to get you to a point
Yeah.
where you have a paying customer on the other side. So not only they're making money on the customer buying the food, but they're also making money on the vendor selling the food, you know?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's, I'm telling you, this is, and they actually are doing on top of it other forms of advertising as well, whether that be tablets in the back of the Ubers,
Mhm.
where they can give these tablets to Uber drivers that can put them in the back and get a cut of the revenue from there, or do something like this, which is have a car top advertising thing on there because they have so many people driving for them that these are verticals that they can start climbing where they can share some of the revenue with the drivers,
Sure.
and make their bottom line a little bit healthier, but also that means that they don't have to, I don't want to say they don't have to pay the driver as much, but it just seems that if there's advertising revenue that's high margin that's coming in, that's a vertical that they can share that with the driver and now not
Yeah.
not be accused of like what is that thing called, underpaying their
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
drivers. That's been one of their biggest controversies, that
For
you
sure.
know
Yep.
that people that they underpay. But in my opinion, it's not so much that it's underpaying, it's about how much you're willing to put in to get what you want out. And I do understand, and I do feel for a lot of the drivers because they are making certain commitments. But remember, each one of these drivers is running this as a business. So if you're only prepared to work 20 hours a week, you're only going to get 20 hours a week worth of money. If you're only driving during times where things are not busy, you're gonna get paid like it's not busy,
You.
right?
Yeah.
It's all based on need. So I do understand and I do feel for them. But
Yep.
guess what? The experiences that I had with dealing with cabs, I will never go back to cabs again, ever. You know?
So it's funny, and there's a couple of really good comments in here too. EC and Abby are bringing up good stuff, and always appreciate them checking in on Twitter too. Like,
Yeah.
I think you guys totally get it. Like, this is a platform play where you have a double sided marketplace, and you're finding a way to find revenue on both sides. So when Tesla works on FSD and Uber works on PaaS rather, a platform as a service, those two things come together and they both do great. And this is what so many people miss about these huge young companies, relative young, is they're not blindly building these solutions. They're building it because they know what's coming down the road. I can't build a giant platform unless those around me are developing platforms with similar strengths that I can pull into my platform, and then you get an even tighter and thicker moat around your castle, so to speak. I think, um, gosh, it's funny to think like they've been around for so long, but really people don't realize what they do still, and I think that's a big call out too. Like, like this question from Avi here about the Joby piece. I have a real perspective on this, and Kris, I bet you do too because of where you work. If you work in Manhattan, you drive by Blades on the water. Blades is essentially a helicopter for hire company to take you from point A to point B. Okay, very popular in the area. I mean, very popular in the area as in it's a real company and doing real things. And for those who don't know, Joby is essentially like a miniature. I don't even know the right word. An air cab type of thing, like a lightweight electric version of getting people from point A to point B over ground or off ground. I'm not an expert in Joby, but what I simply will say is this: if you think that there is potentially a market for it, and you know there's another company already operating in that space, I think they've learned really well that when you have a Lyft, you can elevate. When you have maybe a Blades, this is the way they elevate. Now, I don't know if Joby was good or not at this point, but it isn't hard to imagine a scenario of why this makes sense. I'll tell you a really quick story here because I realize like I'm a boomer, as everyone keeps reminding me, even though I'm in my 30s, but I get that word's flexible. I love to read. I love to read about the history of the people who founded gigantic things. So Cornelius Vanderbilt was one of the first folks who actually started building ferries and working on ferries to bring people from the islands over to the mainland in New York, etc. And it starts with one, then two, then it turned into trains and cabs, horse-drawn cabs, and then it turned into more and more and more. And this is the same story we're talking about. It starts with the ferries to get people from A to B. You have price control because you're the dominant player in the market. Now you're building the ships. Now you're building bigger ships. You're doing cruise liners, right? Now you're doing cross-Atlantic, right? Then you're going to the West Coast. Then before you know it, you're laying tracks and have rail, and you're delivering goods. And it's like these stories, these historical, gigantic folks who build things from nothing. We always look at the end, right? The back half is they're evil and they made all this money and did terrible things. Whatever, we're not going to debate it. But the front half is there's a huge problem. It's not being solved. There are tons of people who had boats, but they weren't comfortable. They weren't that big. They didn't run on a schedule, to your point. And he was like, hey, what if I charge, I don't remember the price, call it a quarter for a crossing. We cross at the same time every day, 5 times a day. He's on that boat working his buns off, right? And it reminds me of like a funny story. So I work in tech, Kris, as you know, and probably some of the folks who watch know too. I had a guy I was mentoring years ago. He's a software engineer, and he makes good money, okay? He had went out and bought a used Audi A6, which I thought was kind of interesting because he wasn't the type, right? And I said to him one day, I said, boy, I got to be honest with you, I'm kind of surprised that you picked up an A6 because it doesn't fit your profile. And he's like, oh, I obviously haven't even told you what I'm doing. On the way home from work, he was turning Uber on to give people rides home. And in the morning on the way into work, if they were going the same direction, he picked them up and give them a ride. And I was like, wow. I was like, so what you make, for those who don't know, software engineers make really good money. And he worked for me directly. So he was doing well. And I was like, what kind of money are you making? And I forget what the number was. It wasn't huge, but essentially it was like all of my gas, my insurance, my car payment, and and
he ran it through an LLC, so it
whatever,
all gets deducted. Yep.
Yeah, so he's like, it's perfect. It takes care of all my car expenses. I get my lunches all paid for. I can go to dinner with friends or date or whatever. And like, here's this guy making $120 a year starting in software engineering who's still doing Ubers to and from work. And I was like, wow, that's really the stuff people don't talk about, is like your point about if you want to do it for 40 hours a week, people doing too much, I'm sure, but it's there if you want to get it. And then there's a whole different group of people who are like, hey, what if I can just throw a little more money at my student loans or towards saving for a house or try to put money into an investment, etc. So I think that the gig economy has a lot of real bad, for sure. I think it's for sure. But there's also a whole lot of real good too. And I think that the more we see regulation come out, the more it's only going to strengthen what Uber's building. And I would argue, looking at that deck and looking at people who now run the company, they've built this to expect regulation, I would almost dare say. And if anything, I bet they want regulation. That's the one thing we always hear on the pundits on CNBC or whoever of what's this going to do to Facebook? What's this going to do to Twitter? What's it going to do to Uber? What's it going to do to Amazon? This isn't, these are multi-billion-dollar revenue-generating companies who have plans for all of these things. It's not like one day they change the way they have to profile things and the company goes out of business. They pivot. They have 100 different models they can move to, And I think that it's an interesting call out that there are so many different types of people using it, working with it, and thinking about advertising on it for all different reasons. The only thing I want to call out too, I've never heard of this before with Uber, but when you were describing, Kris, your Georgia experience, I was thinking how great it would be to even do things like a curated city exploration. Right? Like, hey, you're Kris, you know Manhattan really well, right? I know where you work, so I know the area. And I was thinking like, man, like if I want to bring my son to New York, so I work over by Bryant Park when I'm in the city. I don't work out of there all the time, but I'm right on Bryant Park. And I was thinking like, man, it'd be cool to jump off Penn, with my son who's 11 and say, let's go see all the cool stuff.
Yeah.
And just be able to sit in one nice, clean car, go around and get, hey, you know what? Hey, where's the best place for a pizza? Where's the best place for a snack? Where's the whatever? And get that curated experience. And I think that that's a way to generate some revenue for yourself too as a driver. And there's just ways to build a business off of a simple thing. Anyways, I'll stop talking because I've been dominating it. I'm going to go now tomorrow, Chris. I'm going to buy a whole bunch of shares now because you get me so fired up.
So let's do a quick, just fun exercise.
Sure.
What was your first experience with Uber? I'll tell you mine. It was a funny story. Basically, one of the, I was a young guy in New York City. I had a really nice apartment. I had a girl come over, and it was the next day and the next morning. And I was like, man, how am I going to get this girl out? And I used to just have like a taxi company. I was just call them and be like, hey, I got you a taxi. That was my way of saying, hey, So I was like, hey, I'm going to call you a cab. She's like, no, it's okay. I got this Uber coming. I was like, what the hell is an Uber? They're like, oh, it's this app where you just, put your information and you just tell them where you want to go and they'll just come and pick you up. I was like, this is awesome, And so after that, me being a gentleman, the next time I had a female over, she was like, oh, I'm going to go grab a cab. No. I'll Uber you. I'll Uber something for you. I'm a gentleman.
Yeah. That's funny. I do remember the first time I was in, oh my gosh. And it wasn't, I didn't even know what Uber was. This is probably like 2012, 2013, whenever they were first starting it must have been either Austin or Dallas. I forget now. It was in Texas, but it was either Austin or Dallas. Mm-hmm. And we were coming out of a Topgolf, and
by the way, we need to do an episode on Callaway, but I love Topgolf. Topgolf is like one of my favorite recreational things.
So I got to tell you, after my first time going to a Topgolf years ago, the very first thing I did when I got home, I called to see if I could open one and franchise one. And at the time, they weren't ready to do them up here. And I was like, damn it, that would be amazing. And now there's one in Boston. I'm like, no, that should have been mine. But
25 mil. I looked into it too. I think the base starting is 25 million.
You know what though? I bet you could find partners real quick for a Topgolf.
Oh yeah.
So very first one, this absolute wrecker of an F-150 pulls up, sleeveless shirt, absolutely rocking and rolling, and it was just super fun. The guy was total comfortable in the truck. There were probably 5 of us. We were slammed in. I'm the biggest guy, so I'm sitting up front with the dude. We're having a great conversations, and we're like, look, man, where can you take us to get just to have a good time tonight at a cool Texas bar? And he's like, solved. I'm going to bring you to the perfect place. So like my very first experience, I remember sitting next to the guy who ordered it, John, on the way back. And I was like, you don't touch a credit card. You don't touch cash, nothing. You don't have to do anything. And it literally knows where we are. And like the gears were turning big time because I was thinking like, wait a minute, hold on. Like they've mastered logistical fencing down to like feet. And I think for anyone who maybe looks at this just as like a 4-letter stock and a price, geofencing at this kind of a scale with so much going on around it, that is wild. And that is also tough back then. Now you can just copy what they did. But like I remember sitting in the front seat. We're literally at an analytics conference and everyone's getting ready to go to a bar, leaving Topgolf. And I can't stop thinking about the fact that like, not only do they know where we were, we knew exactly where we were going to go, the mileage, what route to take. It was like integrating so many different things into one. I just couldn't stop thinking like, holy moly, this is a big deal. But then, this maybe is an interesting transition to like the good experience of it. But the transition is then you have the typical founder who is, only able to accomplish these things probably because of some of the negatives about them, right? Which has its own set of frustrations. But Kris, I'll just reiterate this for those who are watching. There's a show out right now called Super Pumped. It's basically the story of Uber and how they came from nothing, where they got to where they are. And it's such an interesting scene in the movie, and I'll give you the real world version why this hit so hard for me. In the Boston area, we were seeing a lot more Lyfts than we were seeing Ubers, and it was very obvious because it had I don't know if anyone remembers the big pink mustache on the front. So if you got a Lyft, you knew it was a Lyft because it had a gigantic, fluffy, furry mustache on it. And it was such this cool idea. And even the name felt better at the time, like Lyft. Like, yeah, I need a Lyft. It was everything felt so good about it. But then we find out, like years later, like not only did Uber have the opportunity to buy Lyft, but buy them really for pennies on the dollar. And it was all because of ego and megalomania, really, that blew the deal up. But then you look at where they are today, and you're like, man, it's that competition keeps them going all the time. And hey, Lyft's got a great business too, by the way, for those who are looking for a pure play in this space. But like, you look at where they are today, to just fighting over buying their competitors to now competing with everyone. I mean, it's absolutely bonkers wild.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think I think Carl
Carl
Icon's
icons
involved.
involved.
Oh,
Oh,
can you hear the echo?
Nope.
I guess it's just me. Yeah, Carl Icons. Oh, that's so weird. I'm all of a sudden I'm hearing an echo now.
Batteries going?
Maybe. I don't know. I just put these on, so it doesn't matter. Whatever. I could talk through it. So yeah, the first time I heard of Lyft was actually because of Carl Icahn, because Carl Icahn had taken a large position in Lyft. That was my intro to it. But Uber has actually moved way past what Lyft is trying to do. Lyft is still stuck in a very like small category. And I just want to show this on stream. If you look, this is the total addressable market that these guys are going after. If you look at it, close to almost $15 billion of total addressable market in today's term. So they're not like what do you call it? Fully there in terms of like maturity, right? They're still got a ton of growth ahead of them. And the other thing that I really like is that now the company's actually focusing on profitability,
Hmm.
which is always great because once you hit some profitability milestones, you get a lot of these whales um, of um, of like pensions and hedge funds starting to throw their money at you as well. So if you see, they've really optimized themselves. They generated last year they they generated probably close to almost, well, not last year, but last quarter they generated 86 million in positive EBITDA, which is really big because once they start hitting these growth curves, literally it's just profitability like there's no tomorrow. So I think they're starting to transition away from just straight growth into now also taking account profitability into account. So their acquisition costs are much lower because they've already got a ton of people driving for them. They're
Yeah.
all over the place. They don't have to spend nearly as much on advertising that they did, 5, 10 years ago. So all those margin improvements are going to translate to a bottom line that's going to be huge for them going forward. So just in terms of like a business, they're at a point where they're actually in a much better place than where they could have been. Because there's one of the things that I always talk about with regards to valuing companies is how much execution risk does a company have to the price that you're buying it for. So an example that I would say is when you look at Palantir, while I am bullish on its growth, they still have a ton of execution risk ahead of them,
Hmm.
right? This company has already proven themselves. At this point right now, it's just scaling for them.
Yeah, this
This
is
is the easy
maximizing and
part.
optimizing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the easy part. The
Yeah.
hardest part is getting your foot through the door, expanding all over the place, making sure that you have a customer that's, loyal to you and you have a business that's thriving. Now is the point where you can actually so that in that S curve that you normally talk of, they're starting to go to that. They're nowhere near their maturity yet. So when it comes to it from investing, this is the exact company that you should be looking at in a time frame like this. They're finally starting to recover from the pandemic.
Yep.
The total gross bookings are starting to climb up. Demographic changes are also on their side because I don't want to say boomers are like retiring and everything, but as the population
Yeah.
ages, you're coming across all the new generation of kids and people have grown up with this stuff. All
Mhm.
the people 40s, 50s, 60s that were hesitant on using software to do booking like this, they're starting to become less of a segment of the population. So when you have an entire generation of people that have grown up on nothing but Uber, whether they were taking Uber to class or taking Uber to school, or their parents would do like call an Uber for them, or if they were going on dates, dude, whenever I went on dates when I was in the city, you think I was gonna say, "Oh yeah, let's go grab the B9"? Like, no, we're gonna take an Uber.
That's right.
So we're the first generation where all of this stuff is just becoming so normal to us, and I think that's actually one of the reasons why people are missing out on the investment. It's because
Well,
yeah. Go ahead.
no, no, please go. Finish your thought. Finish your thought.
No, it's because it's something that we all can't live without because it's so easy, and yet I guarantee you right now, if you turned Uber off, I think the economy would crash. Like that's the level of penetration that they've actually hit right now, where people would literally be standing at airports like, where am I, how am I going to get to work, how am I going to get to, Steve's place or whatever. There's tons of people even at my hospital right now. That's another area where they're starting to expand on, is actually drives that are partnered with hospitals to get people to the hospital,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
and same thing from hospitals back home, so it's they're literally hitting on all cylinders, and they're doing really good on that. So go
Just
ahead.
as a point of reference, and I want to really talk to what you just said a moment ago. The difference in market cap between Lyft and Uber is approximately about 5.5 times, which to me feels wildly low. Lyft is somewhere in the neighborhood of I think about 13.5 billion for market cap. Uber's a little over 71 billion. These are give or take. And you think about 71 billion, like just think for a second some of those numbers we shared earlier. 71 billion in total market cap, but they have global domination. They're going into more industries, closer to profitability across multiple sectors and industries. They're doing wild things. And I think the call out here is anyone who's been in the markets for a long time and is a student of the markets, okay, understands that the value is in people not understanding, because when they do, they won't want to miss it. In my mind, if I ask the average person, hey, why are you not in Uber? They're gonna say, well, it's just car sharing, and not everybody does it. But then you realize like they're doing millions of rides a day or some crazy number like that, and over 100 billion in run rate. And yes, that doesn't necessarily mean all that revenue goes to them, but that's okay. And you start to look at all these other things they're doing. The focus is the acquisitions, and to your point, like there's a lot of point solutions here that by themselves are billion-dollar market caps. Like think about just elderly folks who can't drive anymore. That market alone is probably worth $1 billion. Young kids who have to get from one place to another and the parents can track the whole trip. That is a $1 billion+ marketplace, right? Like probably way more than that, frankly. And you start to really suss it out and think about it, and you're like, this is a much, when we talk about TAM, and I always talk about a lot on my channel about TAM and SAM, right? Total addressable market, and then the serviceable addressable market. This is a case where their SAM and their TAM are actually pretty darn close because of the way they can innovate on the platform to deliver the needs of the individual pieces. And you really start thinking about the scale of what can be next and how they can do it. And you can see how that just further integrates into the experience of the Amazon, of what Tesla's doing, of what these other folks are working on. And my God, Kris, even as we're talking about this, I'm thinking, so like I said earlier, I had sold, God, what did I do this morning? Essentially 500 shares worth of puts, right? So I sold 5 contracts at, I want to say 36 or so today. Grab a nice little premium on that. But now I'm like, you know what? I need to go way bigger, I think. And this is not financial advice at all. I have the portfolio to cover myself and I hedge. So just to be clear for everybody. But the more I look at this and the more I think about like where this price has been and where it is today, here's the bottom line question for anyone who watches this. And honestly, anyone who's in the comments, like I'd love to see what you think. Is Uber worth more now than when they IPO'd? If the answer is yes, then something's wrong. There's a value issue at play here that the market hasn't recognized, in my opinion, because when they went IPO, they were in fact just a cab company, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now they're doing all of these things plus putting the cabs on the platform. I mean,
And
you know,
Sean, just to close off, I have one last slide, and this is the slide that sold me. This is their projected free cash flow.
oh my
Five
God.
$5 billion a year in projected free cash flow within 2024. That's 2 years away. Imagine what their free cash flow is going to be in 2030. You're talking about a $70 billion company right now with 5 billion in free cash flow projections.
Oh
And
my
I'm
God.
guessing, and this is their projections, which I'm sure are kitchen synced. That they're
Yep.
probably not even trying to just show what their really real
Yep.
free cash flow. Imagine all the cash that they're going to be able to generate and use for things like either share buybacks, right, or expansions, which will grow their revenue even further, right,
Yep.
or even possibly, who knows, significant dividends, right, which is another thing. they're still in their growth mode, so I don't think that they'll hit dividends just yet. But I definitely think if the valuation makes sense, then they're definitely going to do share buybacks. In which case the price is going to just go bananas.
Well, and just on that note too, I know this isn't the point of this call, but I'd call you and I talk about this all the time. When you're in a great company that you believe has a long-term growth perspective, there's lots of ways to generate income off your shares. I think that's one of the reasons why I realized maybe I didn't explain this earlier. Um, the reason I sell puts is because I am bullish and I want to earn income the entire way up with the shares. So if you're wondering why I would be selling puts, I'm not buying a put hoping it would go down. Kris, I know you know this, but for anyone who's curious,
Hmm.
if I'm buying a put, it's because I think the price is going to go down and I want to take profit. I'm selling a put at a price that I believe the stock will be worth more when expiration comes, so I get to collect all that income. Or worst case scenario, get a discount when I buy the shares on the day that I bought them in essence. Look at the comment that came in. That's amazing. RK, I'm going to tell you a true story. Kris, I might as well just tell it what I was doing earlier. Last night, my plan was to shoot a short from the library in my town. And because I haven't actually been to the library so long, they weren't even open. I had no idea. So I kind of blew up my own little joke there. But I do appreciate that. I should take an Uber to the library today. They won't be open, but I'll still do it.
Yep. We're hitting a 1 hour mark, which I think is good. Just one last thing. I haven't done enough of a deep dive in it yet, but just from what I've seen so far, their equity stakes in these other companies outside the US are also going to be huge. I know Didi was one of those that they took a hit on because of all
Sure.
the Chinese regulatory issues, but eventually Didi is going to list in Hong Kong and eventually Didi is going to be worth a significant amount of money. That's going to add right into their bottom line in terms of assets, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Same thing with some of the other areas for international expansion. If they're not succeeding in that market, they just buy up equity in things that are, and literally there's profit that way.
I
So
agree.
even in terms of investment, they're smart with what they're doing. And like I said, I think their CEO is top notch. Leadership is great. Business is great. Running on all cylinders, hitting multiple verticals. They're on the cusp of profitability. I think they've got a ton of growth ahead of them, and I want to be in on it. So
Yeah.
I don't usually like doing options on companies like this, so I just DCA. So I just set up a nice
Sure.
dollar cost average.
Yep.
So I'm investing a certain amount of money every week. I'm just gonna sit back, and that's like a nice little thing. So if it goes up, yay, I made money. If it goes down,
Yep.
I got it at a discount. That's how I feel about it.
Kris, I want to give a little bit of bonus material here for things that people aren't thinking about. That you and I, coming from what we do for a living, this is like the over the hour bonus material. Something that we haven't talked about, they don't talk about in their material, and I think is also a bit controversial, but I want to talk about it anyways. The data. The data that they are collecting on habits, on commuting, on spending, on food, on delivery times. This can all be sold back to governments for infrastructure projects, for businesses on when to be open, for tire manufacturers on when things are getting replaced and maintained. They are generating a profile at a metadata layer. Metadata is data about data. I know you know, Kris, but for anyone who doesn't,
Hmm.
right? At a metadata layer that's telling us soon so much about habits. One of my favorite movies of all time is Ex Machina because I'm an analytics guy and I love AI. And I always think about there's a scene in that movie where if people don't think about it, yeah, you might slightly off on exactly what that is. There's a scene where he says, "How do you build the brain and the data?" And he said, "Oh my God, it's the Blue Book, which was essentially Google. I can track what everyone's doing and looking at and reading." And it wasn't about what they're looking at, but why they're looking at. And I think about that from an Uber perspective that this is a company that's known for getting people from point A to point B with an app on their phone. And the reality is they've imagine every car is a sensor. It is traveling nonstop all day, every day, collecting data, costs, price, movement, opportunities, availability, everything. I mean, it's wild to think the value of what they can build with the data that they have in there.
Yeah, targeted advertising. It's another vertical. Like I
I
said,
agree.
it's just
I
they
agree.
have growing verticals all over the place. And even from a pricing optimization standpoint, they could sell cars to like literally get bulk pricing on cars, sell them to their drivers. Like I said, there are so many verticals to which Uber and some of these other even ride hailing companies can really reach out into and do really well. But I think Uber is the one that's positioned, in my opinion, for the most amount of growth. So it's not to say that the other companies are not doing well. It's just that Uber is the Amazon of the world, whereas the other ones are still like, eBay, where they just segment themselves into certain
Sure.
certain niches. So I think Uber, like I said, is the Amazon of mobility, in my opinion. So
Mhm.
I would get in early. Like I said, I'm in it already. So and I'm just gonna keep adding to it.
Yeah.
This was a great discussion. I had a
Great.
great time.
Yeah. This is and it's funny how these things come about. Like we were just chatting, and you said, "What do you think about Uber?" And I was like, I don't even remember what I said. I'm super bullish or something. And it was funny. We both were doing the same kind of research on the same stuff. So like, it's funny how these things come together. There's no, I think if you're wondering if we spend hours pre-planning what to talk about, this was like a two text, and they were like, "Yeah, I'm free at 6. When are you free?"
Yeah,
So yeah, this
yeah.
is really fun. And I was already bullish, Chris, but I got to tell you, like, I'm going to start really looking at some strategies tomorrow, or probably I'm going to spend my whole night doing it if I'm being honest about it.
Oh,
Since
nice. All
the
right.
library's closed, there's nowhere else I'm going to go, so I might as well do that.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We had a great time. Make sure you guys subscribe to my channel and as Sean's as well. Just look for Invest to Live. He's on YouTube and on Twitter. I'm on YouTube and Twitter also. So just catch us and yeah, have a great one. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, hey, Shabari. See you guys.